He didn't flinch when a protester screamed inches from his face. He didn't blink when a drunk tourist threw a bottle. But the moment that old man fell, he broke formation for the first time in 10 years. And what he whispered, still, haunts the palace to this day. London, 11:58 a.m. The main gate of Buckingham Palace shimmered in the midday light like it was gilded in gold. The smooth limestone steps were polished by time and millions of footsteps from around the world. Tall black wrought-iron fences rose proudly like royal swords guarding history. Two guards in bright red uniforms wearing jet-black bearskin hats stood motionless like stone statues. Their shadows stretched long across the cobblestones, silent, unmoving amidst the bustling crowd. People and tourists began gathering in front. They held up phones, snapping photos and recording videos, giggling as a child tried to climb the fence. Further away, some couples sat on benches sipping takeaway tea, eyes discreetly glancing at the guards as if looking upon living relics. A gentle breeze blew. The royal standard fluttered high above, signaling one important thing. The Queen was not present at the palace. But no one knew that, just minutes from now, everything would freeze. No more laughter, no more camera clicks. 8-day, only heavy silence, and a question with no answer. And then, he appeared. A slow figure walking with a slightly unsteady gait emerged from across the street. No one noticed at first, just an old man, wearing a faded beret, a long gray coat adorned with medals, badges, and yellowed ribbons of honor. Each step he took seemed to lift memories and collapse into reality. A group of tourists turned to look. They started whispering. One asked another, "Who is he? Looks like a retired soldier? What are all those medals for?" A young American woman whispered to her boyfriend, "Hey, is that a veteran?" He shrugged. "Old dude's probably here to see the guards like the rest of us." But he didn't stop at the fence like everyone else. He walked straight ahead, and no one stopped him. Before the imposing iron gate, he paused, his eyes locked. On the guard on the right, a young soldier, muscular, with eyes sharp as knives, standing rigid to the last millimeter. No guard was allowed to react to the crowd. They couldn't speak, turn their heads, or show emotion, unless ordered or faced with a clear threat. But the guard's eyes flickered slightly, very slightly, and at that moment, the old man collapsed onto the cobblestones. A dry clatter sounded like falling metal. His medals scattered from his coat, spinning then rolling at the guard's feet. No one could react in time. Tourists panicked. Some shouted. Others raised phones to record. A child asked their mother, "Mommy, is he dead?" But right then, the impossible happened. The guard stepped out of position. He left his ceremonial post, broke formation, bent down, and gently lifted the old man with both hands, as if lifting a flag. The entire square fell silent. No one could utter a word. A royal guard, trained to stand motionless through snow, jeers, and threats, had broken the rules. Publicly. Before hundreds. For an old man who had fallen. And then, he whispered something to the old man. Very softly, very quickly, but everyone nearby heard. "Sir, it's an honor." And that was the beginning of a day history never recorded. But anyone who was there that day would never forget. The event should have ended there. A sudden, touching moment, leaving a beautiful echo in the hearts of witnesses. But things are never that simple. Especially in a public place where emotions and ego are more exposed than understanding. Less than 5 minutes after the guard helped the old man up, a sleek black SUV rolled slowly to the palace gate. Tinted windows, diplomatic plates. The door opened. A tall man stepped out. Slicked back hair, large sunglasses, wearing a sharply tailored Italian-style European suit. A small flag pin, the American flag, adorned his collar. In his hand was a phone streaming live video. A few bodyguards. Followed behind, dressed in black, earpieces in their ears like characters from an action movie. The man didn't look around. He strode toward the crowd, pushing aside a few tourists without apologies. He spoke loudly, in a thick American accent, filming as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, right here behind me is the Royal Palace, the exact spot where protocol is everything, tradition is sacred. And those guards, stone cold. But what if I told you, one of them just broke," some people whispered. Some recognized him. A famous TikToker known for breaking rules in sacred places. He specialized in challenging military protocols and filming guard trolling across countries. Over 20 million followers. He raised his hand toward the palace gate, pointing to the guard nearby, still standing close to the old man, now receiving aid from a medic who had arrived in time. "That one. Yeah, him. The unshakable royal guard just broke formation. For this old guy. Respectful. Maybe. But here's the real question. Was that a breach of duty?" The guard didn't react. Still standing straight. No words, no movement. The TikToker took a step forward. His eyes squinted behind sunglasses. A showy gesture, half mocking, half challenging tone. "Come on, don't be shy now. You already broke one rule. How about one more? Tell us, who is that man? And why did you break the code for him?" Whispers grew louder among the crowd. A group of German youths raised phones to film. A French photojournalist snapped non-stop. An old lady sighed, whispering to her granddaughter, "He's looking for a reaction, not the truth." But the TikToker didn't stop. He raised his camera, stepped closer to the fence, nearly pressing the lens to the guard's face. "Let's test it. Let's see if he still remembers the rules. Because if one man's collapse breaks a decade of discipline, maybe these guards aren't as unshakable as we thought." He held up 2 fingers before the guard, framing a zoom with his fingers, then whispered, dripping with sarcasm, "Flinch, just once. That's all I need." And then he reached out and touched the tip of the guard's rifle. The crowd held its breath. The entire square seemed frozen, as if everyone felt the disrespect wasn't just toward the guard, but toward the entire ceremony they were witnessing. And the guard still didn't react. His eyes were icy cold, but his back remained straight. The rifle stayed steady. The old man nearby regained consciousness, eyes half open, vaguely aware something was happening. But no one dared move. The TikToker's bodyguards just watched, as if used to this game. A Japanese tourist spoke softly like a breeze. "He's crossing the line." But no one guessed that was not the final limit. Because in that moment, the TikToker suddenly turned his back to the crowd, raised his hand at the guard and shouted, "I order you to salute me." The entire square froze. A verbal command shouted, in the tone of a man who thinks himself king. And just seconds later, came a moment that made everyone hold their breath. Not because the guard responded, but because the old man, lying there, suddenly grasped the guard's hand tightly and whispered a sentence, just loud enough for him to hear. And from the guard's eyes, something changed. "I order you to salute me." The shout echoed through the air like a slap, against centuries of tradition. The TikToker stood there, chin raised, eyes full of arrogance, as if he had just won an invisible battle. The guard, still motionless, every muscle on his face taut like a drawn bow. His silence was not weakness. It was control. Behind him, the old man still lay on the ground, shaded by a nearby pillar. His trembling hand still held the guard's arm, clinging to something distant, a past none of the crowd understood. And then, things started slipping out of control. The TikToker stepped forward again. And this time, he didn't just touch the rifle, he grabbed the barrel. I said, "Salute me." Or are you just a doll in a funny hat? A few people in the crowd shouted, "No!" A young girl blurted out before covering her mouth. A man standing behind muttered, "That's assault. He's literally asking to be arrested." A civilian security guard on the edge of the square started calling on the radio, but no one could act in time. Because in that very moment, the guard moved. Not fast, not forcefully, just a small step forward, but enough to make the TikToker step back half a step. Then, the guard spoke, a voice deep, clear, and colder than steel. "Remove your hand, now." The TikToker raised his eyebrows. It seemed that was exactly what he wanted. A reaction. He smirked. "So you can talk. Cute. Let's try again." But before he could finish, the guard decisively swung his rifle, not to attack, but to precisely and deliberately push the man's hand away. Not violent, but not friendly either. The TikToker froze. His face lost a bit of arrogance. Then, the guard turned around, knelt down on one knee beside the old man. The entire square held its breath. No one understood what was happening, because a royal guard not only reacted, not only spoke, but also knelt, in front of an old man in a worn coat with faded medals. The TikToker tried to regain control. He raised his camera, his voice sharp. "Is this a prank? Some royal stunt? Are you even real, man?" The guard did not look at him, his eyes only on the veteran. His hand gently touched the medal rolling on the ground, then lifted it and pinned it back on the old man's chest, where it had fallen off when he collapsed. Then he spoke, not to the crowd, not to the camera, but only to him. "You dropped this, sir. I believe it still belongs right here." The old man looked at him trembling, his eyes cloudy but now sparkling as if awakened by something very ancient. At that moment, the TikToker burst out laughing. "Oh, wow! This is gold. This is viral. The royal guard kneeling for some random old guy with medals. Who even is he? A janitor from WW2? Mistake. A serious mistake. Because this time, the entire crowd reacted. An older man among the tourists stepped forward, his voice firm with a strong Italian accent. "That random old guy saved 3 of my uncles at Monte Cassino. You insult not just him. You insult every soldier who ever bled so you could livestream." A Scottish woman spoke up, tears welling. "My grandfather served with him. That medal you're mocking? That's the Distinguished Service Order." The TikToker stepped back slightly. For the first time, it seemed he was losing control. His bodyguard also started to look uneasy. No one applauded. No one laughed. Only cold, angry, and contemptuous eyes turned toward the self-centered man. The guard remained kneeling beside the old man, and the old man took his hand, then nodded, softly. In that moment, the guard stood up and returned to his position. No words to the TikToker, leaving behind a heavy silence and a question millions would later debate. Why would a royal guard break the rules just because an old man collapsed? The answer, only that guard knew, and we can only guess. He said no more. He did not look around. He just stood there, as if he had never knelt, never stepped out of line, never broke any rule. But everyone knew something had changed forever. The TikToker now stood frozen, his mouth open as if to say something, but the familiar words, sarcastic, mocking, triumphant, no longer came out, not out of fear, but because for the first time in his life, he faced something no camera could distort. True respect. A bodyguard beside him gently touched his shoulder, a subtle reminder. "Let's go." But he stood rooted. Then the guard spoke for the second time. Not to the crowd, not to the camera. Just one sentence, gentle but sharp as a sword drawn from its sheath. "You mocked what you don't understand. That's not bravery. That's noise." Silence. Each word carved from granite. Then he turned toward the tick-tocker, a gesture not in any protocol. The guard's eyes, not angry, not fearful, just a look, from someone who has seen more than you think. You came here for a show. What you saw was history. What you touched was sacrifice. What you broke can't be fixed with views. No one dared breathe hard. A boy in the crowd gripped his father's hand and quietly asked, "Dad, is that soldier a hero?" And the father, a former British soldier, did not answer immediately. He only nodded softly, then placed his hand over his heart. The tick-tocker turned away, for the first time, not to film, but to avoid the guard's gaze. His bodyguard followed, head bowed. The group left the square like ghosts. No applause, no photo requests. Only a heavy silence clung to them like an inescapable shadow. And, as they disappeared, something strange happened. The guard, still standing there, was approached by a young tourist, not too close, and said, "Sir, may I?" She raised her hand, not to touch, but just to salute. A proper, military-style salute. The guard nodded slightly, and then the group of tourists took turns, saluting solemnly. No orders given, no background music, just a line of people, from many nations, bowing to a quiet soldier who made the whole world listen. An old black man in a worn uniform, who had collapsed silently, now sat up with help from some Italian soldiers. He looked at the scene, and smiled softly as if he had waited a lifetime to see this moment. And when the afternoon sun shone on the silver medal on his chest, that light seemed to speak what no one dared say aloud. There are rules, but there are moments when breaking them is the only way to honor them. No one filmed TikTok anymore. No one laughed. No camera followed the departing TikToker, for now all lenses were on the guard, and the old man. The guard, still, silent, but from his shoulders you could feel something had changed. The usual stillness now carried a different weight, a weight of memory. Suddenly a voice rang out from the crowd, clear, somewhat choked, but full of authority. His name is Sergeant Major Charles E. Langston. All eyes turned to the man who stepped forward from the spectators. He wore a dark blue vest, a British Army badge pinned to his left chest. His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "He was my instructor, 40 years ago. He trained us, the very first British regiment to serve under joint NATO ceremonial duties." A wave of whispers spread. The speaker stepped closer, this time looking directly at the old man. He served in Korea, Vietnam, the Falklands, and trained 5 generations of guards. He's the reason why our stance never breaks, why we don't blink, why this guard, he turned toward the royal guard standing there, knelt without shame. The air thickened. A middle-aged woman covered her mouth, hiding sobs. A veteran stood at attention, raising his hand to salute. No one laughed anymore, because the truth had been revealed. The old man who collapsed before the palace gate was no anonymous figure, but a living legend. The royal guard, still silent. But for the first time since the beginning, his eyes glistened with tears. Another man, clearly an American tourist, whispered to his companion, "Langston? That's the guy they mention in military academies. He wrote the doctrine on standing guard under fire. He's in the field manuals." The crowd seemed magnified through a lens. Everyone looked at the old man differently. No longer just an old man in worn clothes, but a father to soldiers. A man who dedicated his life to training disciplined silence, now returned by a grateful silence. And then, something no one expected happened. The royal guard turned around, and stepped toward Mr. Langston. He stopped, straightened up, raised his hand, and saluted. Not the mechanical salute of protocol, but a salute between comrades in arms, a deep respect, transcending all barriers of generations, ranks, uniforms. Mr. Langston, still seated, looked at him. His lips moved just enough for the guard to hear, "You held the line, son. You did well." And then he slowly raised his hand to return the salute. The entire square fell silent. Even the doves stopped flapping their wings. Only two men remained, one standing guard, and one who once taught the world how to stand guard, exchanging an eternal salute. And in the soft light of the late afternoon, the crowd understood. They had just witnessed a moment that would never happen again. A moment where ritual, discipline, emotion, history, and immortality converged in a silent gesture. The TikToker, now at the edge of the square, glanced back. Maybe he thought someone would chase after him. Maybe he thought laughter, millions of views, and comments like "savage" would pour in as usual. But no, nothing. No one followed. No one cared anymore. Every eye, every camera, every heart, now focused on the place he tried to break into. And failed. He raised his phone, perhaps intending to live stream to fight back or explain. But then he saw the live comments, each line like a slap in the face. "You mocked a legend, bro. He trained your entire army and you disrespected him? Delete your channel. Shame on you. This is why silence, content. He saluted a king while you filmed yourself like a clown." Each comment was not fire, but stones, heavy, cold, sinking deep into the fragile reputation he tried to build on this digital platform. The bodyguard next to him no longer held a look of respect. He just shook his head, stepping back half a step as if to distance himself from the shadow the TikToker cast. Far away, the square remained still, but in that silence was a judgment needing no words. Some tourists turned to look at the TikToker, not with anger, but with the eyes of someone who understood. This person was not worthy of hate, only worthy of being forgotten. A child in the crowd asked his mother, "Mom, who is that man?" The mother replied without glancing at the TikToker, "No one, dear." And just like that, he disappeared. Not physically, but in the terrifying way any attention seeker fears. Erased from the conversation. Erased from the event. No longer mentioned. Meanwhile, at the center of the square, where Mr. Langston was helped to sit down by medics and guards, a scene as beautiful as a painting unfolded. The royal guard returned to his post, a slow, steady motion. He raised his weapon back into guard position, stood tall, motionless like a statue. No one said, "Thank you." No one applauded, because what happened had gone far beyond applause. A foreign tourist slowly took off his hat, placing it over his chest. An old man bowed his head. A boy stood at attention, and all understood. Dignity does not come from shouting, "Who I am," but from the way you stand silently when the whole world is watching. That TikToker came to mock, and was left in silence. That soldier just stood guard, and made a whole generation bow their heads. The royal guard walked back to his position, his steps heavier than usual, but not from fatigue. Because the meaning of each step had changed. No longer ceremonial patrol steps. These were steps carrying a memory, a kneel not in any manual, but etched in history. He returned to where he stood, hands back on his weapon, spine straight as a string, eyes fixed forward, unblinking, silent, motionless, as if nothing had happened, but everyone present knew it had, and it would forever remain. On the other side of the square, Mr. Langston was helped away by medics, his figure still bent, but in everyone's eyes, it was no longer weakness. It was the mark of a lifetime of dedication. A boy ran up, not filming, not asking for an autograph, simply handed him a military coin left by his father. "My dad said this is given to real soldiers," the boy whispered. Mr. Langston smiled softly. Not a big smile, just a faint curve on a face weathered by time. Just enough to show he felt warmth. On the palace's high balcony, a general stood silently. No one noticed him, and he didn't need them to. He just looked down at the royal guard, then nodded quietly. A nod no one saw, but enough to know. Today not only was a ritual upheld, but a tradition passed on. The camera slowly panned back to the royal guard. He still stood motionless, but now every gaze was different. No one saw him as just a symbol anymore. They saw a man who knows when to bow, when to stand tall, who knows silence that echoes louder than any speech. No lines spoken, no loud soundtrack, only one phrase slowly appeared on screen. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned, often in silence. The screen fades to black. The sound of ceremonial footsteps rises, then slowly fades away. Have you ever witnessed a moment when no one speaks, but everyone understands? No applause, no banners, no cheers of any name, just one man standing still, and a square silent in respect. That day, outside the royal palace gates, the soldier broke the rules. Not out of weakness, but because he was too strong to pretend not to see. The old man who fell was more than a man. He carried history on his shoulders, and when the soldier knelt to help him up, he rose together with a forgotten past. Today's world is rushed, frantic, chaotic. People compete to speak, compete to appear, compete to stand out, but some choose to stand still. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they have already spoken through living. From an unexpected kneel, from a courageous stillness, from breaking the rules to preserve true value, a lesson was written, not in words, but in attitude. Maybe tomorrow, no one will remember that TikToker's name. Maybe no one will reread Mr. Langston's biography. Maybe that soldier's name will never be in the news. But in the hearts of those who were there that day, and those watching this video, one thing remains: honor doesn't need a microphone. Respect doesn't come from orders. And silence, sometimes, is the loudest sound. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a moment where a silent act changed everything? Share your story below. And if you believe respect cannot be forced, only given, leave a in the comments. We read every line. And sometimes, silence is the most beautiful answer.